Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into something kind of spicy. Sex and relationships.
Ooh, getting right to it.
Well, you know me, no time to waste. We're exploring the guide to getting it on this time around.
Sounds intriguing. What's the overall vibe of the book?
It's really honest, actually,
Mm.
and it challenges a lot of the traditional assumptions around sex and relationships. Like, right off the bat, it debunks those 10 commandments of sex you always hear about.
Oh yeah, those rigid rules. I feel like those change all the time though, don't they?
They do. It points out how much advice has changed even recently. Like in the 80s, the focus was all HIV/AIDS, abstinence, condoms, that was it.
Yeah, totally different landscape back then.
Now, with things like pre-EP, better testing, it's shifted. Consent, pleasure, those are part of the conversation now.
That's a good reminder that things are always evolving. We should stay, open to learning and growing, especially with something as personal as sex.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of evolving, the guide really dives into how important understanding your partner's romantic style is.
So not just the grand gestures then, like flowers and chocolates.
Not always. What's interesting is that the book, it highlights how understanding those subtle differences in romantic styles is actually key to a stronger connection.
Oh, that makes sense. You could think you're being super romantic, but totally miss the mark for your partner.
Exactly. So how do we figure out our partner's style? Do we just straight up ask them?
Well, you can. Direct communication's always great. But it's also about paying attention, like what makes their eyes light up? What kind of affection do they respond to the best?
Like learning their love language, but for romance. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And speaking of things that can go wrong, let's not forget safety. The book actually reminds us that sex can be statistically less risky than some everyday things.
Really. Less risky than, like, driving, for example. It makes the point that by being informed and taking precautions, we can manage those risks and focus on the good stuff.
I think a lot of people, especially younger folks, are taught that sex is inherently dangerous. It's good to have that perspective shift.
Totally. It's like driving, right? Follow the rules, be aware, and you're much less likely to have an accident.
Great analogy. Okay, so let's say we've talked about safety and we're starting to get intimate. The book has some practical advice even for those first steps, like that sometimes awkward transition from a closed mouth to an open mouth kiss.
Ah, the dreaded first kiss. I remember those days. Butterflies in your stomach.
They have a whole technique for that. It's called the tongue tip test.
Okay, I'm listening.
Instead of diving right in, you use the tip of your tongue to gently touch your partner's lips. It's a way to, test the waters, see their response before going further.
Oh, that's actually pretty smart. Takes the pressure off a bit. Exactly. And it lets things build up more gradually and consensually, which, speaking of, the book stresses how important nonverbal communication is throughout those intimate moments.
Nonverbal, so like body language.
Yeah. It points out that something as simple as touching their hair or breast can either enhance the mood or totally kill it, depending on the person.
Oh, for sure. You got to be in tune with your partner and what they're comfortable with.
Totally. It's about being present and in tune with them, not just physically, but emotionally, too.
That's so important. It's about creating a genuine connection.
And speaking of connection, the book talks about exploring nakedness beyond just intercourse.
So, like, spending time naked together without, the expectation of sex.
Exactly. It says that can build honesty and deepen intimacy, like creating a safe space to be vulnerable, explore each other's bodies, but without the pressure of performance.
I love that. Just enjoying the closeness and the physical connection, no pressure.
Right. It's about being comfortable with each other. And speaking of new landscapes, the book also talks about how technology has changed our experience of nudity and intimacy, like sexting in webcam communities.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's a whole different world now, isn't it? All those digital ways to connect and explore.
It's true. We're in a digital age where the lines between physical and virtual are kind of blurry. Makes you think about how we navigate those new forms of intimacy and make sure they're healthy and consensual.
Definitely. It's a whole new set of rules and etiquette to figure out.
Totally. A new world of exploration. And sometimes those explorations lead to unexpected discoveries. Like, for example, the book mentions the surprising popularity of pantyhose as a fetish.
Whoa, really? Pantyhose?
Yep. They even include a letter from a reader who finds them incredibly arousing. Just shows you we all have our own unique things, and what seems strange to one person can be totally normal for another.
It's a great reminder to be open-minded and not judge what others find pleasurable. Live and let live.
Now, on a slightly different note, The guide gets pretty real about the male experience, and honestly, it's hilarious.
Oh, tell me more.
It talks about how men, like, they see their genitals constantly, right? This visual reinforcement thing.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
But then they contrast that with the less glamorous realities, like bicycle mishaps and those dreaded morning
Why
erections.
have those? A constant battle.
It's like this funny acknowledgement that while there are societal expectations around male sexuality, the reality can be much more, well, complicated.
Humanizes it a bit, makes those expectations less intimidating.
Okay, are you ready for some semen secrets?
Oh, lame on me.
Ever wondered why it sometimes smells like cleaning products?
Huh. Now that you mention it,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird smell.
There's a chemical compound called putrescine in semen. It's also found in cheese and soy sauce.
No way. So that's the connection. I always thought it was like a weird urban legend or something.
Nope, science. And the guide also explores what those variations in semen consistency can tell us about a man's health. Valuable knowledge often overlooked.
Definitely important. It's not just about, the act itself, but about understanding our bodies and what they're telling us.
Now, switching gears a bit, the book tackles a sensitive topic, the cultural stigma around female genitalia.
Yeah, that's a big one. So much shame and misinformation out there.
And it impacts women's body image and self-esteem. The guide encourages women to be curious about their own bodies, and it offers resources to learn more. It's about, reclaiming that ownership and challenging those norms that often silence women when it comes to their sexuality.
I love that. It's about time we start having more open and honest conversations about these things.
Absolutely. And the guide breaks down female anatomy, like the inner and outer labia, clitoris, vagina, even the G-spot.
Wow, a full anatomy lesson. I feel like a lot of people are still missing those basics.
It's true.
Yeah.
And they talk about how pornography can distort our perceptions of what female bodies should look like and how they function.
Yeah, porn definitely doesn't always paint an accurate picture. It's so important to have those realistic representations.
Totally. And the book includes vivid descriptions from real women about the sensations they experience during arousal.
Oh, interesting. So not just the textbook stuff, but real life experiences.
Exactly. It's so refreshing to hear women talking openly and honestly about their sexuality. It helps normalize the experience.
Agreed. It's so important to have those diverse perspectives. Makes you feel less alone.
And speaking of busting myths, let's talk about the hymen. The guide tackles the whole virginity thing head on.
Oh, yeah, the hymen myth. Still so much misinformation out there.
It explains that the hymen isn't a reliable indicator of virginity at all.
It's about separating fact from fiction and empowering women with accurate information about their bodies.
Exactly. And it explores the science and experience of female orgasm, the neurological processes, the emotional responses, the variations in intensity and expression.
It's fascinating how complex the female orgasm is.
It's not a simple switch.
Huh.
The guide stresses that there's no one right way to experience it and encourages communication about what feels good.
It's all about finding what works for you and your partner and being open to trying new things.
Now, for something that might surprise you, the guide says the world of sex lubes is surprisingly unregulated.
Wait, really? I just assumed all lubes were, safe and tested.
Turns out there's not much FDA oversight. So they talk about potential risks and compare those natural options like saliva, coconut oil with the commercial products.
Good to know. I'll definitely be more careful about what I choose.
And speaking of being careful, they do a quick overview of current sex laws.
Always good to have a refresher. Laws are constantly changing, right?
It's crucial information to stay informed and to be sure you're acting responsibly. Now, are you ready for some straightforward advice on handjob techniques?
Haha. Okay, let's hear it. This is definitely a topic people are curious about but might be too embarrassed to ask about.
The guide doesn't hold back. It talks about grip, foreskin management, the whole wet versus dry debate.
Wow, getting into the details.
And it's all based on those real male masturbation habits.
So they're not sugarcoating anything.
Nope. And they point out that even the terms we use, like beating your meat, don't exactly suggest gentleness.
Uh-huh, that's true. Not the most delicate phrasing.
So they talk about how men tend to grip themselves much more firmly than, someone else might expect.
Interesting. It makes you think about how that knowledge can be useful when giving a hand job.
Exactly. And they also delve into the art of finger fucking, which is often misunderstood.
Oh yeah, definitely needs more explanation.
They emphasize tenderness, lubrication, and really understanding the sensitivity of the clitoris. It's not just penetration, it's about finding those sensitive spots and stimulating them in a way that feels good.
Exactly. Taking your time, paying attention to your partner's cues.
And they go into techniques for breast stimulation too, acknowledging that preferences vary, and it's not just about focusing on the nipples.
It's all about exploration and communication, finding what feels good for both partners, right?
Absolutely. Now, let's talk oral sex. The guide covers giving and receiving, and it's packed with practical tips.
Ooh, this should be interesting. It's definitely a topic that a lot of people have questions about.
When it comes to going down on a woman, they talk about hygiene, listening to cues, and even have some advanced techniques like what they call the landscape versus portrait tongue flick.
Whoa, okay, what's that? I'm intrigued.
It's about varying the direction and motion of your tongue to stimulate different areas of the clitoris and labia.
Makes sense. Keeping things interesting, right?
Exactly. And they even use the experiences of lesbian and bisexual women to talk about the taste of female genitalia.
I love that they're incorporating diverse perspectives.
And of course, they don't leave out the guys. They talk about male oral sex with the same level of detail, talking about techniques, preferences, communication, the whole 9 yards.
Important to remember that everyone deserves pleasure. It's not a one-way street.
Now let's talk about something that's not always considered the sexiest, but is definitely essential. Condoms.
Oh, yeah. Gotta stay safe. But I admit, they can sometimes feel like a bit of a mood killer.
Well, the guide offers some pretty humorous advice on making them part of the foreplay.
Okay, now that I got it here, how do you make condoms fun?
It's about incorporating them in a way that feels playful, not like a chore. They also debunk some myths about compatibility,
Like what?
like using those household lubricants. Turns out some of those can actually damage condoms.
You're kidding? I had no idea. I always thought any lube would do.
Not so. They give specific recommendations for condom-compatible lubes, so you don't have any mishaps.
Good to know. Safety first.
And they talk about using condoms for oral, vaginal, and anal sex,
So they cover all the bases.
emphasizing using a new condom for each activity and for each partner. Staying safe and protecting yourself and your partner from STIs is key.
Absolutely. Now, let's move beyond just the physical, shall we? The guide dives into some more complex relationship dynamics. They have this interesting story about a woman who found incredible satisfaction with a partner who wasn't perfect on paper, but who was willing to learn and communicate.
Oh, I love that. It's a reminder that the most important qualities aren't always the obvious ones.
It's about that emotional intimacy and communication. Sometimes those can be even more fulfilling than just physical compatibility.
And speaking of evolving dynamics, the book also explores the world of casual sex, acknowledging how technology, gender roles, even alcohol are shaping that landscape.
It's a whole different world of dating and relationships these days, a lot more to navigate.
They offer advice on everything from those tricky friends with benefits situations to the pitfalls of workplace romances, like a cheat sheet for modern dating.
So helpful, because let's be real, those situations can get complicated fast.
And life throws us curveballs, right? The guide even offers advice for adults moving back in with their parents.
Oh my gosh, that's so relatable. Happens to the best of us.
They focus on setting boundaries, communicating maturely, and even finding ways to, maintain a discreet sex life under mom and dad's roof.
Gotta get creative. But seriously, those boundaries are important.
Totally. It's about finding that balance between respecting their home and having a life of your own. And because relationships evolve, they discuss communication and adapting to each other's needs over time.
People change and grow, and so do relationships. You gotta be able to roll with the punches.
They share a story about a couple who learned to negotiate their sexual needs, talking openly about what they were feeling. It's a great example of how that open communication can lead to a more fulfilling sex life for everyone involved.
It takes the pressure off and makes it more of a team effort, you know?
Exactly. And they acknowledge that religious upbringing can have a big impact on sexuality, sometimes creating shame or conflict.
Oh yeah, for sure. Those early messages can really stick with you.
The guide encourages those open conversations and seeking resources that promote a healthier perspective, challenging those ingrained beliefs and finding what feels authentic to you.
It's about owning your sexuality and feeling good about it.
And speaking of modern romance, let's talk about online dating. It's a whole world unto itself.
Online dating can be a jungle. So many options, so many potential pitfalls.
The guide offers tips for navigating it all, from choosing the right service to spotting those red flags.
Like those profiles that seem a little too perfect.
Exactly. They emphasize being cautious and trusting your gut. If something feels off, It probably is.
And they talk about divorce, too, acknowledging that it's a reality for many, and sometimes it's the healthiest choice.
It's a tough subject, but it's important to be realistic.
They also address the unique challenges and opportunities for sex and relationships in the military, drawing on those real-life experiences from soldiers.
It's a world that most of us don't really understand, so it's great that they're shedding some light on those experiences.
They talk about deployment, separation, those temptations that can come up in those environments.
It must take a lot of strength and resilience to maintain a relationship in those situations.
And they talk about the difficulties faced by combat veterans with PTSD and how that can impact their relationships and intimacy.
It's so important to be aware of those invisible wounds and offer support to those who are struggling.
And for those who are curious about the science behind all of this, the guide dives into sex research, explaining those ongoing efforts to understand how our brains respond to sexual stimuli.
It's fascinating how much we're learning about the brain and sexuality.
They do point out the limitations of current technology. Like, we can see which areas of the brain light up during arousal, but that doesn't tell the whole story.
There's still so much mystery.
Yeah.
But to remind us that human sexual experience is incredibly diverse, they share those excerpts from real-life sex surveys.
I love that. It's so relatable and makes you feel less alone in your experiences.
It's about normalizing the spectrum of human sexuality and challenging those narrow definitions of what's normal.
We're all unique, and that's something to celebrate.
Now let's address some common challenges head-on, like erectile dysfunction.
It's something a lot of men experience, but it can be hard to talk about.
The guide debunks that myth that a hard-on is the key to a happy relationship and talks about the importance of open communication and finding solutions together.
And they caution against those quick fix solutions like those herbal supplements and male enhancement products that are often unregulated and potentially dangerous.
It's important to talk to your doctor and make informed choices about your health. And they also discuss low sexual desire, which is often overlooked. They recommend resources to help understand the underlying causes and explore solutions beyond medication.
It's a reminder that there's help available for a wide range of sexual challenges.
And they talk about the importance of being in tune with your body, especially when it comes to painful intercourse. Adequate arousal is key. And they also address those potential medical issues that might need a doctor's attention.
It's about advocating for your own health and not suffering in silence.
And they offer a really compassionate perspective on hypospadias, reassuring those men experiencing it that it doesn't define their worth or their ability to be a good lover. It's about normalizing those variations and promoting understanding. Now, last but not least, the guide dives into body modification, from penis piercings and tattoos to more extreme things like penis splitting.
Whoa, they don't shy away from anything. It's great that they're covering the whole spectrum.
They emphasize the importance of safety, research, and finding a reputable piercer or tattoo artist. It's about making informed decisions and feeling confident in your choices.
Yeah, it's like sometimes those drinks can make you forget to think things through. Absolutely. Being responsible for our actions is important. And speaking of being responsible, the book has some pretty interesting advice about workplace romances. Proceed with caution is what they say.
Oh yeah, for sure. Those can get messy. Real quick, what do they suggest?
Well, like thinking about the potential consequences,
Yeah.
before you jump in head first.
Right. Because what happens if things go south? Do they address that?
Yeah, they have some tips on managing those breakups, if it comes to that.
Yeah.
Keeping things professional is key, they say. Avoiding drama. Stuff that could, affect your career.
Good advice. Leave the drama for your personal life. Now, the guide also talks about a situation that a lot of people are facing these days, adults moving back in with their parents.
Yeah, it's a reality for a lot of folks. I've been there. It's definitely a challenge.
What kind of advice do they give?
Well, they talk about setting boundaries, with your parents
Mhm.
and communicating in a mature way.
Right, because sometimes it's like you regress back to being a teenager when you're under their roof again.
Exactly. And they even talk about how to maintain a discreet sex life, while living with mom and dad.
Haha. Yeah, that could get awkward.
They suggest things like soundproofing or being really mindful of, the timing and the volume.
Right. Don't want any accidental concerts for the folks next door.
Definitely not. And they also stress the importance of having those honest conversations with your parents about, needing privacy, respecting each other's space.
So it's like setting those ground rules right from the start,
Yeah,
so everyone knows what to expect.
exactly. And speaking of changing needs and expectations, they also talk about how important communication is in long-term relationships.
Because people change, right?
Right.
What might have worked at the beginning of a relationship might not work 5 years down the line.
Totally. And they emphasize being open to like adapting to each other's needs and desires over time. It's a journey, not a destination.
They share a story about a couple who they learned to negotiate their sexual needs. They would talk about whether they were feeling more like, masturbating or having intercourse, depending on their energy levels and what they were in the mood for. That's a great example of how being honest and open can make a relationship stronger, takes the pressure off, and allows for more flexibility and understanding.
It's about being a team, right? Working together to figure out what works for both of you.
Exactly. Now, the guide also acknowledges that religious upbringing can have a big impact on people's sexuality, sometimes in a negative way.
Oh, absolutely. Those early messages can be so powerful. And sometimes they lead to a lot of shame and guilt.
They encourage open communication with partners and seeking out resources that can help shift those perspectives to something healthier.
It's about challenging those beliefs and finding what feels authentic and right for you, regardless of what you were taught growing up.
Absolutely. And speaking of the modern dating world, the book offers a ton of tips for navigating online dating services.
Online dating can be so overwhelming. So many apps, so many profiles. Where do you even begin?
The guide gives advice on choosing the right service, understanding those features, being aware of red flags, and just generally how to, stay safe and sane in that online world.
That's so helpful. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of it all and forget about those practical considerations.
And they remind us that those profiles that seem too good to be true probably are.
Yeah, gotta be realistic. Not everyone's a supermodel with a PhD.
It's about using your common sense and trusting your gut.
And they also address the realities of divorce. They emphasize that sometimes, even though it's difficult, it can be the healthiest option, even for the kids.
It's a tough conversation to have, but sometimes it's necessary. They encourage open communication and creating that stable and supportive environment for the kids, even during a separation or divorce.
Absolutely. Putting their needs first.
The book also offers a really unique look at the challenges and opportunities for sex and relationships in the military, drawing on real-life experiences from soldiers.
It's a world that most civilians don't have a lot of insight into, so it's great that they're sharing those perspectives.
They talk about deployment, the strain of separation, the temptations that can arise in those environments.
It must take a lot of strength and trust to navigate those challenges.
And they talk about the sad reality of infidelity in the military, acknowledging that it happens more often than we might think.
It's a difficult truth to face, but they encourage open communication and a willingness to work through those issues if both partners are committed to the relationship.
They also touch on the difficulties faced by combat veterans with PTSD and how those experiences can impact their relationships and intimacy.
It's so important to be aware of those invisible wounds and to offer support to veterans who are struggling. It's not something that just goes away when they come home from war.
They talk about how those symptoms of PTSD, like hypervigilance and flashbacks, can affect their ability to connect with their partners.
It can make intimacy really challenging, and it's crucial to approach those situations with sensitivity and understanding.
Absolutely. Now, for those who are fascinated by the science behind it all, the book also dives into the world of sex research.
It's an ever-evolving field, and there's still so much we don't know about the brain and how it processes sexual stimuli.
They talk about those limitations of current technology. Like, we can see which parts of the brain light up during certain activities, but that doesn't tell us the whole story.
It's just a tiny glimpse into this vast and complex world of human sexuality. But they also remind us that everyone's experience is unique.
They share some excerpts from real-life sex surveys, which is always fun.
I love those. It's so relatable and makes you realize you're not alone in your experiences, no matter how quirky they might be.
They really do cover the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
And speaking of the spectrum, the guide also addresses some common sexual challenges, like erectile dysfunction.
It's something that affects millions of men, but it's still often treated as a taboo subject.
They debunk the myth that a hard-on is the solution to all relationship problems. And they talk about the importance of communication and finding solutions together as a couple.
It's about support and understanding, not judgment.
And they caution against those quick fixes, like those herbal supplements and enhancement products.
It's easy to be tempted by those promises, But they emphasize the importance of talking to your doctor and finding safe and effective treatments.
Taking care of your health and making informed decisions.
And they also talk about low sexual desire, which is something that can affect anyone, regardless of gender. It's often overlooked or misunderstood, but it's a real issue.
They recommend some resources that can help people understand those underlying causes and find solutions.
Sometimes it's hormonal, sometimes it's situational, sometimes it's emotional. There are so many factors that can contribute to low desire.
It's about figuring out what's going on and finding what works for you.
And they talk about the importance of being in tune with your body, especially when it comes to things like painful intercourse.
Pain during sex is never normal.
They emphasize the importance of adequate arousal, and they talk about those potential medical issues that might need attention.
If you're experiencing pain, it's important to talk to your doctor and get it checked out.
Absolutely. Don't suffer in silence.
And they offer a really compassionate perspective on hyposcadias, which is a condition where the urethra opens on the underside of the penis.
It's something that a lot of men are self-conscious about, and they often feel ashamed or embarrassed.
The book reassures them that it's nothing to be ashamed of, and that it doesn't affect their worth or their ability to be a good lover.
It's about normalizing those variations and recognizing that everyone is different.
Now, speaking of different, the guide also dives into the world of body modification, from penis piercings to tattoos to those more extreme modifications.
Like penis splitting.
Yes. They cover it all. And they emphasize the importance of safety and research, finding reputable piercers and tattoo artists who can help you make those informed choices.
It's your body, and you have the right to modify it in any way that feels right for you. But it's important to do it safely and responsibly.
And it sounds like they really get into the nitty-gritty of it all.
They do. They talk about different types of razors for different areas, like using a woman's razor for legs and one designed for men's faces for, the bikini area.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
All right.
Makes sense, though. And for those who want a more permanent solution, do they talk about electrolysis?
They do. They explain how it works, destroying the hair follicle, but they do mention that it can take a few sessions to get those results.
So patience is key.
Definitely. And, they also talk about the societal pressures around pubic hair, encouraging people to make choices that feel good for them, not what, society dictates.
I love that. Body positivity all the way. But okay, shifting gears a bit, the book also gets into sexually transmitted infections, right?
They do. It's a really important topic, to be informed about the risks and how to protect yourself. They cover a lot of ground, from chlamydia and gonorrhea to syphilis, HIV, herpes, HPV.
So they don't shy away from the serious stuff.
Nope. They give you the symptoms, transmission routes, prevention strategies, all of that.
I think sometimes people don't realize how common STIs actually are. It's important to talk about it openly and honestly.
Absolutely. And they debunk some of the myths, too. Like, they talk about how chlamydia is often called a silent infection because a lot of people don't have any symptoms.
Oh, that's scary. So you might not even know you have it.
Exactly, which is why getting tested regularly is so important, even if you feel fine.
And they emphasize seeking medical attention if you think you might have something. Early detection is key.
Absolutely. Now, moving on from the purely physical aspects of sex, the book also talks about some of those more complex relationship dynamics, like finding that balance between sexual desire and emotional intimacy.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's not always easy to find that sweet spot where both partners feel, connected and fulfilled.
They talk about the importance of communication, being able to talk openly about your needs and desires with your partner.
And it's not just about the big things either, right? Sometimes it's those little day-to-day check-ins that can make a big difference.
They share this really great story about a couple who learned to negotiate their sexual needs. They would talk about whether they were feeling more like, masturbating or having intercourse, depending on their energy levels and desires.
So it's not just about being in the mood, it's about communicating those needs to your partner.
Exactly. And they acknowledge that religious upbringing can sometimes create conflict or shame around sexuality.
Yeah, those early messages can be hard to shake.
They encourage those open conversations and seeking out resources that can help shift those perspectives to something healthier and more positive.
It's about finding what feels authentic for you, regardless of what you were taught growing up.
Exactly. And for those navigating the world of modern dating, they have a whole section on online dating services.
Oh, that's so helpful. Online dating can be such a minefield.
It really can. They offer advice on choosing the right service, understanding those features, being aware of those red flags, keeping yourself safe.
So important in this digital age. I feel like there are so many scams and just like weird people out there.
Absolutely. You got to be cautious. But they also remind us that, divorce is a reality for many people. And sometimes it's the healthiest option, even when kids are involved.
It's a really tough decision to make. But they emphasize the importance of communication and creating a stable environment for the kids, even if the parents are no longer together.
It's about putting their needs first, even amidst all that upheaval.
Now, for a slightly different perspective, they also talk about the challenges and opportunities for sex and relationships in the military.
Yeah, it's a unique world with its own set of dynamics and pressures. They talk about deployment, separation, the temptations that can come up.
It must be incredibly difficult to maintain a healthy relationship under those circumstances.
It definitely takes work and trust. And they also talk about the unfortunate reality of infidelity in the military. It happens more often than we might think.
It's a tough subject to address, but it's important to be honest about those challenges. And if both partners are willing, they can work through those issues.
They also touch on the struggles faced by combat veterans with PTSD and how those experiences can impact their relationships and intimacy.
Yeah, those invisible wounds can be really difficult to deal with, both for the veteran and for their partner.
They talk about how those symptoms of PTSD, like the hypervigilance and the flashbacks, can make intimacy a challenge.
It's so important to approach those situations with compassion and understanding.
Absolutely. And lastly, for those who are interested in the science of it all, they touch on the world of sex research.
I find that stuff fascinating. There's still so much we don't know about the brain and sexuality.
It's a really complex and evolving field. They talk about the limitations of, current brain imaging technology and how it doesn't tell the whole story.
But they also remind us that human sexual experience is incredibly diverse. They share some excerpts from real-life sex surveys, which is always fun.
Those are my favorite parts. It's so relatable and makes you feel like you're not alone, Whatever your experience is, someone else out there has probably been there too.
It's about celebrating that diversity and breaking down those narrow definitions of what's normal.
And they address those common sexual challenges like erectile dysfunction and low desire.
It's about encouraging open communication and normalizing those conversations so people feel comfortable seeking help if they need it.
They also emphasize the importance of being in tune with your body, especially when it comes to painful intercourse.
It's a reminder that you have the right to say no and to speak up if something doesn't feel right.
And they provide a really compassionate and informative perspective on hypospadias. It's about normalizing those variations and promoting understanding. They also get into body modification, from penis piercings and tattoos to those more intense things.
So they really do cover the whole spectrum. It's great that they approach it all with such honesty and openness.
It's a valuable resource for anyone who wants to learn more about sex and relationships and to, feel more confident and empowered in their own experiences.
I think that's a perfect takeaway. This book is about embracing the full spectrum of human sexuality with all its quirks and complexities.
It's about education, communication, and celebrating our differences.
And most importantly, it's about enjoying the ride. Well, folks, that's a wrap on our deep dive into The Guide to Getting It On. We hope you learned something new and feel inspired to keep exploring and keep the conversation going.
Happy exploring.
See you next time.